The screen goes black. The distant, faint sound of a gavel hitting wood resonates in the air. Low and insistent, a voice pierces the silence. For more than 10 years, America observed the Brown family live out a life of polygamy, love, and strife. But off camera, off microphone, a storm was brewing. One that would not conclude in tears, but in court. On this day, the truth would no longer be whispered. The judge was prepared. The children were prepared. The wives were prepared. And Cody Brown was about to face the ultimate reckoning of his life. The massive courtroom doors creak open in slow motion, light pouring in as the camera zooms ahead. This is not reality TV anymore. This is survival. This is the final judgment of sister wives. The courthouse bore no resemblance to the tawdry sets of a television reality show. The walls were a subdued beige, the floors covered in worn marble tiles, and the thick oak doors hung like sentinels at the gate of the most significant fight the Brown family had ever known. Outside, there was a throng of people. Some were devoted Sister Wives fans, carrying signs and stage-whispering speculations, while others were reporters on the prowl for scandal. Each flash of a camera caught the charged atmosphere. As the first black SUV arrived, a momentary silence fell, then boiled over into screaming. The door opened, and Cody Brown stepped out. His golden locks, once the epitome of charm, now seemed mussed under the strain of sleepless nights. He adjusted his suit jacket, but it did little to conceal the tenseness emanating from him. By his side, practically stuck to his arm, was Robin Brown, the wife who had remained true when the others had deserted him. Their strides up the courthouse steps were stiff, robotic. Cody smiled for the photographers, but his jaw clenched as he heard the yelled questions. "Do you think you'll lose custody? Why aren't the other wives standing by you? Is it true the children don't want to live with you?" Robin ducked her head, holding her purse like a shield. Cody paid no mind to the commotion, but each word reverberated through his head like a gavel slamming wood. In a matter of minutes, another vehicle pulled up. The door opened, and Christine Brown stepped out, dressed in a navy blue dress that bespoke calm assurance. Unlike Cody, she did not glance around for cameras or reporters. Her eyes were locked on the doors of the courthouse, her face inscrutable. But people who knew her could sense it, the determination in her stride, the willingness of a mother to battle for her children's future. The audience cheered once more, some for Christine, others who hushed about the drama that led them to be here. She walked, her heels clicking on the marble stairs, bearing the burden of years of sacrifices. She used to dream of having a big, whole family. But here she was, heading into a war zone in which the battleground was her own life. Behind her, Janelle Brown emerged. Her entrance was subdued, almost demure. She held a thick leather folder tightly pressed against her chest. It wasn't merely a folder, it was proof, the sort that could seal or destroy the case. Within were bank statements, financial reports, and notes she had spent sleepless nights gathering. Janelle was not the kind to make grand pronouncements, but today, her silence cut deeper than words. Then, as if fate had reserved the most complex for last, Meri Brown made an entrance. She did not arrive with a smile or a confident step. Her eyes flashed with doubts as she looked from Christine to Janelle. For years, she had been torn in the middle, Cody's first wife, yet the woman who had been displaced. Today, she had to choose where her allegiance was. Would she defend the man she had ever loved, or the women who had defended her when Cody hadn't? As the three women reached the stairs' top, they shared a quick look. Not words, simply a silent understanding of the tempest they were about to enter. Cody ducked his head the instant she did, and for the first time that morning, their eyes met across the courtyard. It wasn't just a look. It was a clash of years of betrayal, broken promises, and simmering resentment. Within the courthouse building, the mood was even denser. The air had a faintly decaying smell of old wood and paper used in legal documents, a scent that seemed to hold the burden of numerous verdicts. Courtroom 3B was filled to capacity already. Reporters, attorneys offering analysis, and nosy locals occupied every seat in the place. The wood benches groaned under the multitude's weight, their murmurs sounding like an orchestra of tension. The bailiff was at the front, stone-faced, his voice booming throughout the room as he called for order. All rise for the Honorable Judge Harrington. The judge came in, her black robe billowing as she stepped up behind the bench. Her face was impassive, but her gaze darted a moment to the cameras before settling on the Brown family. She had handled her share of high-profile cases, but even she could feel the tension in the room. This wasn't so much about custody. This was about ripping a family apart that had lived under the glare of the world's eye. Kody and Robin occupied one table, their attorney whispering intensely into Kody's ear. On the other side of the aisle, Christine and Janelle took their seats, their lawyer piling on papers with experienced aplomb. Meri lingered for a moment before at last squeezing into a seat next to Christine, the choice made at last. The room fell still. Each rustle of paper, each cough, each click of a pen sounded magnified in the silence. The gavel cracked once, crisp and authoritative. This court is now in session. Kody sat back in his chair, trying to act composed, but his foot bounced restlessly against the floor. Robin put her hand over his, but he jerked it away too hastily, receiving a small scowl from her. Christine's attorney stood up first. Your Honor, today we will have the opportunity to show what really went on behind closed doors. This case is not about television ratings or reputation. This is a case about children who should have stability, care, and love. The words cut through the silence, each one calculated, meant to set up Kody as the bad guy before he even had a chance to speak up for himself. Journalists wrote in a frenzy, the scratch of pens a cacophony like a storm in the courtroom. Cameras snapped at the rear, flashes reflecting off the wooden walls. Kody ground his teeth. He wanted to object, yell that he was a good father, that all of what was being said was distorted and unjust. But the courtroom's rules gagged him, made him sit through it, made him wait, and as he sat, surrounded by people who had once used those words to address him, husband, father, partner, he thought something terrible. This was no longer a matter of who loved whom. This was one of survival. The courtroom doors swung open, and with them, the beginning of a war that would alter the Brown family forever. The gavel came down again, its ring ricocheting off the paneled walls like the sound of a gunshot. The commotion in the courtroom promptly dissipated. Everyone looked at the bench, where Judge Harrington straightened her glasses and surveyed the room. She looked like a woman who had learned too much in her years on the bench. Too many families torn apart, too many secrets brought out in testimony. But even she sensed that what was going to transpire in her courtroom would be far from anything she had ever presided over. Before we begin, she started, her voice firm and authoritative, I would like to remind all of you of the gravity of these proceedings. This is not a television show. This is a court of law. I will not abide theatrics, disruptions, or any pretense to use this courtroom as a stage. Her tone was bitter, calculated, and aimed at all of them. But Kody felt the hurt more than anyone. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat, feeling the heavy burden of her stare, as if she saw through the gloss that he attempted to wear. The judge leaned forward a bit, clasping her hands together. Custody cases are not won by who shouts the loudest, who has the largest following outside these doors, or who tells the most sensational tale. They are won by what is best for the children. And I will hear nothing that does not directly relate to their safety, their welfare, and their future. A low murmur ran through the benches. The crowd wasn't accustomed to being rebuked by a judge, but Harrington's authority imposed itself. And even the reporters, who lived on chaos, wrote in virtual silence. Kody's attorney, a thin man with silver hair and a designer suit, leaned in close. She means it, he whispered. Keep your cool. If you lose your temper, we'll lose everything. But holding his temper was never Kody's forte. His thoughts were racing, and for an instant, he pictured standing up, explaining himself, telling the judge how unjust all this was. Something in her eyes, however, held him back. It wasn't only authority, it was a threat. One misstep, and the judge would dig his grave before the trial even began. Across the table, Christine sat up straight, her face inscrutable, but her gaze piercing. She had been ready for this. She knew Kody's susceptibility to letting his feelings overrule him, and she believed the judge would be able to look right past his charm. Janelle shifted the bulky leather folder on the table in front of her. She wasn't here to posture or perform. She was here for facts, for evidence. But even she could sense the tension in the room growing tighter than a noose. The judge wasn't going to allow anyone to hide behind practiced speeches. All truths, all lies, would be unraveled under the bright light of cross-examination. Meri sat quietly, her hands clasped tight in her lap. Her gaze darted from Kody to Christine, then back to the judge. She sensed the storm brewing within the room, every statement from the judge like the distant rumble of thunder. She knew she would ultimately be forced to pick her side once and for all. Under oath, in the public eye. The idea made her stomach turn. Judge Harrington went on, her voice growing colder. I have read the preliminary filings. I see claims of neglect, fiscal mismanagement, and emotional damage. I also see counterclaims of alienation and fabrication. I warn you all, this court will not abide dishonesty. Anyone who testifies falsely under oath, anyone who tries to manipulate this court will reap penalties far worse than custody decisions. Perjury is a crime, and I will seek it if I have to. The courtroom descended into a smothering quiet. Each sentence struck like a sledgehammer, and the gravity weighed down on all sides. For the first time, the drama of the sister wives' family wasn't amusing. It was horrifying. Kody swallowed hard. His mouth parched. He looked at Robin, who sat stiff, her skin pale. She murmured quietly, "We just have to tell the truth." But whose truth? Kody thought bitterly. His version of truth was not Christine's. His idea of family was not Janelle's. And Meri's truth was a landmine, waiting to explode if she chose to walk into it. The judge focused on Kody, her brow furrowed. "Mr. Brown, you will get your turn to talk. But listen clearly. The court is not concerned with your reputation, your show, or your fans. The only concern of this court is your actions as a father. Do you hear me?" Kody nodded hastily, but in his heart, his blood was raging. How could she disregard the years he worked on establishing his family, putting them in the limelight, providing for them all financially? Did she even know what sacrifices he had made? But he remained quiet, not wanting to forget his lawyer's advice. Then her gaze shifted to Christine. "The same to you, Mrs. Brown. I will not have complaints about your marriage taint custody issues. If you are going to use this court to relive personal hurt, I will close it down right now. Do you know what I am saying?" Christine's jaw set in a line, but she nodded. "Yes, Your Honor. And the same applies to Mrs. Janelle Brown. And Mrs. Meri Brown, if you do decide to testify." The judge's gaze rested on Meri, as if she could already see the battle brewing under her reserved surface. Meri's mouth opened in a tiny space, but she nodded once. She couldn't even hear herself breathing over the thudding of her heart. Judge Harrington settled back in her chair, looking around the room like a monarch over her subjects. "This is the world's focal point for this case, but I want to make one thing clear. I am not going to allow this to turn into show. If at any time I believe that evidence is being presented here for anything other than justice, I will have the room cleared of cameras and reporters. Am I understood?" "Yes, Your Honor," both sides whispered. But even while they talked, the tension increased only. Taking down the cameras would strip away their defenses, their power to drive the agenda. Without the world's scrutiny, the naked truth would be revealed. And for some in that courtroom, that was the most frightening result of all. The gavel hit once more, silencing the warning. "Very well," the judge instructed. "We will continue. Opening statements will be tomorrow morning. Between now and then, I expect professionalism, courtesy, and truth from each of you. Court is adjourned for today." The room burst into clamor as soon as the judge rose from his seat. Reporters jumped to their feet, writing, whispering, taking pictures. The bailiff yelled for order, but it was too late. Kody shoved his chair back hard with a scrape, his cheeks burning with barely suppressed rage. Christine was unruffled, though her hands shook as she picked up her papers. Janelle stowed her proof away in her folder like a swordsman oiling his blade for the next skirmish. And Meri lingered. She sat frozen, staring at the bench where the judge had stood moments before. Her warning echoed in Meri's mind like a ghost. Perjury is a crime. Lies will destroy you. Meri knew she held secrets, truths about Cody, about the family, about nights of whispered arguments and hidden tears. If she spoke them, Cody would burn. If she stayed silent, the children might pay the price. The courtroom doors swung open once more, and the Brown family poured out into the blinding storm of camera lights. The trial itself had yet to start, but the judge's ultimatum made it obvious. Once it did, there would be no return. And deep inside, all of them knew. This fight would not have winners and losers. It would have survivors. The following morning, the courthouse was abuzz like a hornet's nest. The throng in front was even greater than yesterday, spreading across the stairs and sidewalks, their murmurs a steady hum of gossip. Pressmen pushed for space, microphones held out to anyone who remotely looked like a Brown family member. Inside, the courtroom was a pressure cooker. The judge's reprimand from yesterday still hung in the air, but hope crept ahead of fear. Today, Cody Brown would testify. The bailiff called the court to attention. Judge Harrington arrived, stern-faced as ever, and sat down. The gavel came down with a resounding crack, shutting off the restless murmurs. "We will proceed with the testimony of Mr. Cody Brown," declared the judge. Cody slowly got to his feet, buttoning his suit jacket with careful deliberation. He squared his shoulders, attempting to appear confident, though his heart pounded in his chest like a drumbeat. He caught a glimpse of the gallery, noticing each camera lens trained on him, every critic and fan waiting for his next move. If he could convince the courtroom, he thought, perhaps he might regain public sympathy too. The bailiff came forward with the Bible. "Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? So help you God?" "I do," Cody stated firmly, although his voice cracked ever so slightly. He sat in the witness stand, holding on to the arms as if they were lifelines. His attorney came forward first for direct examination. "Mr. Brown," the attorney started smoothly, "how would you describe yourself as a father?" Cody leaned forward, glancing briefly at Christine and Janelle before his eyes settled on the attorney. "I am a committed father. I have always prioritized my children above all else. Every choice I ever made was to provide them with the best life possible." The attorney nodded in respect. "Can you tell the court about how you've provided for your children throughout the years?" Cody began a practice speech. He discussed hours, hard work, financial losses, the intricacies of having 18 children in a plural marriage. His voice increased in volume, in tone, portraying himself as the glue that held a huge, complicated family unit together. The gallery was momentarily transfixed. Reporters wrote, cameras flashed, and a few heads nodded too. But Judge Harrington's eyes did not waver, her pen scratching gently across her notes. Then the first crack. "Mr. Brown," the attorney inquired, "have you ever played favorites with one wife's children over another's?" Cody paused for a split second, too long. Christine's attorney pounced on the moment, writing madly on her pad. "I love all my kids the same," Cody rushed to say, attempting a smile. "But, of course, I can only be in one place at a time. That isn't favoritism, it's logistics." A murmur ran through the room. Everyone was familiar with the rumors that had followed him for years, that Robin's kids got special treatment and the rest of them were wanting. Christine's lawyer stood up to cross-examine. Her eyes landed on Cody like a lioness preparing to pounce. "Mr. Brown," she said sharply, "you just testified to this court that you treat all of your children the same. Is that true?" "Yes," Cody replied firmly. "Then can you tell me," she went on, holding up a document, "why in the last 2 years you've spent almost 3 times more money on Robin's household than you've spent on Christine's, even though Christine has more children living with her over those years?" The courtroom exploded into whispers. Reporters' pens scratched furiously across pages. Cody's lawyer stood up. "Objection! Relevance!" The judge held up a hand. Overruled. Answer the question, Mr. Brown. Cody's face flushed. Those figures are being taken out of context. Robin's children had medical requirements, school bills, stuff Christine's children did not. Christine's lawyer didn't flinch. So, you acknowledge that you placed the other children below Robin's? I didn't say that, Cody exclaimed, his voice mounting. I said their requirements were different. The gavel came down. Mr. Brown, rein in your tone. The room fell silent once more, but the floodgate was broken. Cody's anger had burst through the spit and polish mask he attempted to wear. Christine's lawyer leaned in, crowding him. Let's discuss time then. Isn't it a fact that over the previous holiday season, you spent Christmas Eve and Christmas Day with Robin and her kids only, whereas Christine's and Janelle's kids didn't see you at all? Cody hesitated. That's not true. Christine's attorney displayed a block of printed photographs, Facebook updates from the holiday. They presented Cody grinning alongside Robin's festively decorated tree, with her children around her, presents stacked high. Would you care to discuss these, Mr. Brown? The photographs were given to the judge, who looked them over with an eyebrow raised. The courtroom hummed once more, the murmur building like an oncoming storm. Cody adjusted his seat, perspiration breaking at the hairline. That doesn't indicate I left the others behind. I called them, tried to visit them, but schedules... Christine's lawyer interrupted acutely. So you acknowledge on one of the most significant days of the year to children? You made it your business to spend it with Robin's family, and not the rest of your children? Cody's voice fell, pale with defensiveness. I did what I believed was best at the time. The resulting effect was thick silence. Even Robin appeared uncomfortable, her hand clenched around the table's edge like she wished to vanish. Judge Harrington's pale pen tapped once more across her papers. Her expression was impassive, but pale flashes of disapproval danced across her eyes. Christine's lawyer edged closer, her voice lowering to a softer, more menacing note. Mr. Brown, can you tell me you have been present and involved with all of your children equally over the last 5 years? Yes, Cody replied hastily, wanting to save face. Then answer me this, she cut in, her tone as cold as a blade. Which of your children's birthdays did you attend personally last year? The courtroom was silent. Cody's jaw dropped, but nothing escaped. His mind reeled, faces and dates confusing him. He could see balloons, cakes, laughing, only with Robin's children. The rest. The recollections were foggy, far away. Christine's attorney lingered, each passing moment another nail hammered into the coffin. At last, she murmured, "No further questions." The judge gazed up. "Mr. Brown, you are excused." Cody stood, his knees shaking, as if the ground beneath his feet was unsteady. He sat back down, but the harm was done. His testimony, which had been intended to demonstrate him as a devoted father, had instead revealed the very favoritism that he had denied. Christine's lawyer shot an understanding glance at Janelle, who nodded marginally, her evidence folder still poised to be unleashed. And as he sat next to Robin, his teeth clenched, his fists balled, a single idea nagged at him. They're not only trying to gain custody, they're trying to kill me. The trial had just started, and already the fissures in his kingdom were opening wide. The courtroom air still reverberated with the sound of Cody's struggling testimony. The pictures, the stammering silences, the stern reprimands of the judge, all of them seemed to loom like a specter above the wooden chamber. Everybody knew the next witness would bury Cody further or provide him with a glimmer of redemption. Your Honor, Christine's lawyer stood up. We would like to call Cody Brown to testify. The words dropped like a thunderclap. A murmur spread through the gallery. Some leaned forward with rapt anticipation. Others whispered, aware that this moment had been years in the making. Christine rose slowly, smoothing her skirt with hands that only quivered slightly. Her face, though, was serene, peaceful in a way that unnerved Cody. He'd recognized this expression before. It was the same one she'd had the night she'd informed him she was leaving, the same one that warned him her mind was made up. The bailiff administered the oath, and Christine descended into the witness stand. The wooden seat groaned under her weight, but her spine was firm, her chin up. She caught a fleeting look at her children in the gallery, their worried faces girding her determination. "Mrs. Brown?" her attorney started quietly. "For how long were you spiritually married to Mr. Brown?" "More than 25 years," Christine replied matter-of-factly. Her voice traveled through the courtroom, steady, without being raised. "And how many children do you have with him?" "6. "And throughout those years, would you call Mr. Brown a present and equal father to your children?" Christine paused, just long enough for the silence to weigh. Then she answered, each word chosen. "No, he was not." The gallery was moved. Cody's lawyer shifted with discomfort, already anticipating objections. But Christine's attorney persisted. "Can you tell us what you mean by that?" Christine's gaze held the attorney, but her words were addressed to the judge. "When my kids were little, Cody was there. He assisted, he played, he was there for them. But as time passed, particularly after Robin came into the family, his presence with my children vanished. Birthdays, holidays, even basic dinners. He opted for other homes instead of ours. My children picked up on it. They felt it. They asked me why their father couldn't be present." Cody twitched in his seat, his jaw clenched. He said something to his attorney, but Christine went on. "Some nights," she said, her tone level, but her eyes shining, "my children would sit by the window, hoping he'd arrive. Hours would go by. He never arrived. And I would put them into bed, trying to make sense of why their father had more important things to attend to." A quiet descended upon the courtroom. The phrase cut deeper than any file of evidence could. Christine's attorney nodded respectfully, letting the quiet hang before inquiring, "Did you ever mention this to Mr. Brown?" "Yes," Christine replied. "Repeatedly. I pleaded with him to spend more time with our children. I begged him to be there. But he always had an excuse. Work, commitments, or just other things." The lawyer leaned in. "Can you provide us with an example, Mrs. Brown?" "A particular instance when his absence specifically damaged your children?" Christine swallowed, her expression cracking just a little. "Yes, my daughter Isabel's operation. She required serious corrective surgery for scoliosis. It was booked months in advance. She begged her father to be present. She begged him. But he told us he couldn't come, that it was too inconvenient, that he didn't want to travel at that time. So I went alone. I held her hand through each excruciating step, while her father remained behind." Gasps spread through the courtroom. Even the journalists looked up from their pads, mouths agape. Cody's face reddened. He sprang from his seat. "That is not true. That's Mr. Brown," the judge boomed, slamming her gavel. "Sit down, or I will hold you in contempt." The courtroom hummed like a beehive, tension overflowing. Cody slumped back in his chair, shaking with anger. As Christine sat calmly still, her eyes locked on the judge, Christine's attorney took his moment before going on. "Mrs. Brown, how did this absence impact your children emotionally?" Christine's voice cracked now, but she didn't let up. "They felt abandoned. They felt unworthy. My daughter, she cried herself to sleep, wondering why her dad didn't love her enough to be there. And I didn't have an answer." The ensuing silence was oppressive. Even Meri, sitting at the plaintiff's table, dropped her head, her eyes welling up with tears. Christine's lawyer moved slowly back to her table. "No further questions, Your Honor." The judge nodded, then turned to Cody's lawyer. "Cross-examination." Cody's lawyer stood, smoothing his tie, his face carefully neutral. He approached Christine with measured steps. "Mrs. Brown?" he began. His tone clipped. "You've painted a very emotional picture of Mr. Brown as a neglectful father. But isn't it true that your decision to leave him was motivated not by his parenting, but by personal differences in your marriage?" Christine held his eyes level. "I left because I couldn't expect my children to continue living without a father who had chosen them. That was not a marriage problem. It was a parenting one." The attorney strode back and forth slowly. "Isn't it also a fact that you determined to relocate your children further away from their father, limiting their access even more?" Christine's face stiffened. I relocated my children to provide them with stability. Their father had already cut his access to them way before I made that choice. The lawyer's mouth compressed. He attempted again. Mrs. Brown, would you admit to having spoken negatively of Mr. Brown to your children? Christine breathed, her eyes shining again. I told them the truth. When they asked where their father was, I told them the truth. He chose not to be there. If that sounds negative, it's because it was negative. And it was his choice, not mine. The courtroom murmured approval. Even the judge's face softened a little. Cody's attorney pursed his lips, knowing more questions would only leave Christine with more room to strike deeper. No further questions. Christine slowly breathed out, her hands shaking very slightly now. She said what she came to say. The judge peered down at her notes, then back at Christine. You may step down, Mrs. Brown. Christine stepped down from the stand, her pace slow and deliberate as she walked back to her seat. She nodded briefly at Cody as she went by him. He shot her a glare, his eyes smoldering with fury, but Christine's impassive face never wavered. For the first time, it seemed as if power had tipped in the courtroom. Cody was no longer the fulcrum. Christine had deflected the light from him and onto the children, the true victims of this war. The judge rapped her pen once, then gazed at the attorneys. We will recess for 10 minutes. The gavel fell. As the crowd broke out into whispers, one thing came to rest in the hearts of all present. Christine Brown's testimony had accomplished what years of hearsay and gossip could not. It had provided the children with a voice within the courtroom. And in doing so, it had left Cody perilously cornered. The 10-minute recess had expired, but the atmosphere in the courtroom had not chilled. On the contrary, it had become thicker, laden with the aftershocks of Christine's shattering testimony. Cody remained rigidly seated at the defense table, his jaw locked so hard the muscles of his face fluttered. His gaze flicked between the judge and his estranged wives, his fingers drumming the wood in front of him in angry agitation. Your Honor, Janelle's lawyer stated, rising to his feet. The plaintiffs called Janelle Brown. The room tilted. Gallery-goers stiffened in their chairs. Janelle, the otherwise measured one, approached the stand with a solidity that held its own subtle gravity. She was the equipoise in the family, the money manager, the voice of sanity. If she'd opted to bring this fight to the courts, there had to be something immense, something perilous. Cody's face went pale by just a shade. He was aware Janelle kept records. She wasn't forgetful like him. She didn't lose receipts or forget numbers. If she had brought her records here, then the secrets he had kept so carefully might at last get out. The bailiff was sworn in, and Janelle sat down. She placed her hands neatly on the table in front of her. Serene, but firm. Mrs. Brown, her attorney began. Can you describe your role in the Brown family's financial affairs during your marriage? Janelle nodded. I managed most of the family's accounts. Bills, budgeting, taxes, real estate transactions. I kept track of it all. With such a large family, it was important to know where every dollar went. And did Mr. Brown also handle these finances? Not really, Janelle replied. She spoke calmly, but her gaze was piercing. He would tell me he oversaw things, but in reality, it was me keeping everything together. I worked, I saved, I managed. But Cody... She paused, then went on. Cody steered money, repeatedly. The gallery gasped. Christine's head dropped, as if preparing herself for what she already knew in pieces. Meri's lips compressed into a thin line. The lawyer moved forward. Mrs. Brown, can you say more? Diverted funds? What do you mean by that? Janelle pulled herself up straight. Money for the whole family, kids' expenses, family bills, medical needs, was taken and diverted. Huge amounts were directed toward Robin's home. New houses, bills paid off, treats bought. Other homes suffered. My kids went without sometimes, while Robin's children had anything they desired. Cody jumped up out of his chair. That's a lie. That is, Mr. Brown, the judge barked, slapping her gavel down. You will sit down, and you will be silent under testimony. Cody sank back into his chair, fuming, his glare burning a hole into Janelle. But Janelle didn't waver. She'd survived years of manipulation and gaslighting. Today, the truth protected her. Her attorney nodded. Do you have proof of these financial discrepancies? Without speaking, Janelle got down and grabbed a thick binder from the floor near her chair. She placed it on the witness stand, the sound of the thud resounding throughout the quiet room. Carefully, she opened it, showing neatly stacked documents, bank statements, images of checks, receipts, tax information. The lawyer raised one page and held it aloft. Your Honor, Exhibit C, a $150,000 withdrawal from the family account into a private trust that is in the name of Mr. Brown alone and Mrs. Robin Brown alone, dated less than 6 months after Christine asked for surgery money for her daughter. Gasps burst through the gallery. Pen scratches filled reporters' pads. The judge's forehead creased as she read the document. Janelle's voice had interrupted the clamor. I asked Cody where the money went. He said it was an investment that would benefit the entire family. But the money vanished, and Robin had a new home some months later. Cody's attorney sprang up. Objection, Your Honor. Speculation. The judge glared at him. The document speaks for itself, counselor. Sit down. Cody leaned back further in his chair, sweat beads popping up at his temple. Janelle's lawyer continued. Mrs. Brown, is there another example you can give us? Janelle nodded and turned over another page. Yes, here's a document of the family's tax returns. Several years where Cody had dependents he didn't support, children who lived mostly with me or with Christine. He spent those refunds on personal things. Thousands of dollars. The judge's eyes slit. You are telling me, Mrs. Brown, that Mr. Brown made false claims of dependence on his taxes knowingly? Yes, Your Honor, Janelle stated resolutely. I caught him in the act. He said to stop worrying and to let him take care of it. But the reality is, he was embezzling from his own kids. The courtroom exploded once again. The bailiff had to call for order. Cody's attorney attempted to get back in charge. Mrs. Brown, isn't it true you profited from these funds too? Didn't you reside in houses, drive vehicles, eat dinners, all paid for by the family account? Janelle's jaw clenched. I lived in houses that I contributed to pay for. I drove cars that I purchased with my own funds. I worked. I paid my share. I sacrificed. But Cody, he spent money on one home while the others went wanting. That is not mutual benefit. That is theft masquerading as family leadership. The words hit like a hammer. Even Meri, who had kept herself aloof and reserved, could not help her reaction. She nodded slightly, her lips quivering. Janelle wasn't done. She leaned in now, her voice even, but brimming with passion. I spent years explaining him. Years telling myself that if I worked harder, saved more money, he would equal it out. But it never did equal out. It was always the same. Our children came second to his ego, second to Robin's demands, second to whatever get-rich-quick plan he was pursuing. I am finished explaining him. The gallery was dropped into stunned silence. The reporters hesitated in mid-scribble, feeling the weight of the moment. Cody's attorney, visibly shaken, jumbled his papers. No further questions. Janelle's attorney retreated, her job finished. The judge hunched forward, her face unreadable but keen. Mrs. Brown, you may be seated. Janelle stood, closing her binder with care, and returned to her seat. She did not glance at Cody. She did not need to. The damage was done. Cody slumped, his previously boastful stance deflated. The image of the patriarchal man had fallen apart, replaced by a man revealed in the blinding light of reality. The judge slapped her gavel. Court will reconvene after a short recess. As the gallery exploded again, Christine stretched out and lightly squeezed Janelle's hand. Meri moved in, whispering something only they could comprehend. For the first time in years, the wives weren't broken. They were together. And as Cody sat by himself, anger seething in his eyes, the fact struck him. The fortress he believed he had constructed around himself was crumbling, one witness at a time. The momentum of the case had irrevocably changed. Now that Janelle's files were spread open, it wasn't about feelings anymore or accusations. It was about facts, hard facts, facts that would kill him. and everyone in that courtroom was aware of it. The door to the courtroom creaked shut behind the recess. Whispers still hummed among the crowd, repeating the bombshells Janelle had dropped. Financial fraud, tax returns, bank transfers. Each revelation had cut razor-sharp slashes into Kody's alibi, leaving him ghostly pale and fidgety at the table. His foot pounded into the floor as hard as possible, the only noise in the otherwise quiet chamber. When the bailiff brought the court back into order, the judge's gaze swept the room with piercing authority. We will hear the next witness. Proceed, plaintiffs. Christine and Janelle glanced at each other, then both at Meri. For one heartbeat, she stood frozen, as if the accumulated weight of years of loyalty, silence, betrayal, and isolation, shouldered itself upon her shoulders, all in a single moment. Her lawyer stood. Your Honor, we call Meri Brown to the witness stand. The crowd moved in surprise. Whispers flew like birds around the room. Meri, the original wife? The one who had always hung on the facades of togetherness. The one who had defended Kody even when her own heart was shattering. She was thought to never speak against him. And yet, here she was. Kody's head whirled in her direction, his eyes wide. Meri, don't do this, he growled under his breath, his voice low but harsh enough to slice. Meri didn't say anything. She stood up slowly, her movements purposeful, her expression impassive. Every step was an act of defiance against decades of being silenced. The bailiff administered her oath. Her hand quivered slightly as she let it fall, but when she sat down in the witness chair, her shoulders straightened. For the first time in years, Meri looked firm. Mrs. Brown? Her lawyer started out, softly but firmly. How long did you and Mr. Brown have a marriage that lasted? More than 30 years, Meri whispered, her voice nearly delicate. But then she threw back her chin, allowing her words to firm up. I was his first wife. I was part of building everything that followed. And throughout those decades, the lawyer prodded, did you have support as his wife? Meri's mouth compressed into a line. A silence hung, tense, awkward, constricting. At last, she spoke. No, not for a great while. A ripple of shock ran through the gallery. Even Christine and Janelle looked at each other, shocked at the directness of her confession. Her lawyer leaned in closer. Can you tell me what you mean? Meri took a deep breath. Kody emotionally left me years ago. He sat me down and told me flat out that he didn't love me anymore, that he didn't view me as his wife. But he wouldn't release me. He kept me bound, not as his wife, but as part of his image, the righteous first wife. I remained quiet, hoping, praying. Things would get better, but they never did. The gallery gasped. Kody's face twisted, his jaw clenching. Meri, stop twisting things. Mr. Brown, the judge snapped, her gavel banging. You will not interrupt this witness again. Meri's eyes darted to him, but she didn't blink. She went on. I remained because I believed in family. I believed in our children, our religion, and the dream we presented to the world that we were living. But it was a sham. Behind closed doors, there was neglect. Not merely for me, but for the other wives, for our children. We gave up everything. Our dignity, our happiness, our security, while he built an empire around him. The room was stunned to silence. Even the judge looked for an instant surprised. Meri's lawyer put a lone sheet of paper on the stand in front of her. Mrs. Brown, can you read this? Meri glanced down. Her breath caught. It was a reproduction of one of her old journal pages, which she had written during the worst years of her marriage. She nodded. Yes, this is my writing. Would you be willing to read it aloud for the court? Meri's fingers shook as she raised the page. Her eyes raced over the familiar words, inscribed in ink from a day when her soul had felt buried beneath silence. She swallowed hard and then started. I feel invisible. Kody gazes at me as if I'm nothing, as if I'm in his way. I beg for attention, but he only turns to Robin. He says I'm difficult, that I should be thankful for what little he gives me. I cry at night, alone, as the family feigns we are whole. My heart is shattered, but I'm stuck. He won't allow me to leave. The courtroom was at standstill. Each word struck like a hammer on rock. By the time she dropped the page, tears had blurred Meri's eyes, but not her voice. This was my life. Or so, for years. And I didn't tell anyone because I believed that if I spoke up, it would ruin the family. But the truth is, it wasn't the truth-telling that destroyed us. It was the silence that gave him strength. Cody pounded his fist on the table, his voice elevated. "You're exaggerating, Meri. You're twisting." The judge's gavel thudded like thunder. "Mr. Brown, one more outburst, and I will have you removed from this courtroom." Cody leaned back, his face red, his breaths guttural and labored. Meri faced the judge once more. Her tone hardened now, more biting. "I know Cody will claim I'm bitter, that I'm lying. But we're not alone. We all experienced it. Christine, Janelle, our kids. We bore the burden while he pursued an image. And when the cameras stopped rolling, when the lights went away, we were left with nothing but his absence." Her lawyer leaned in. "Mrs. Brown, you're telling me Mr. Brown manipulated you into remaining in a relationship against your will?" Meri nodded deliberately. "Yes, he used religion. He used family. He used guilt. He said leaving would condemn me, that I would ruin the lives of our children. So I remained in a marriage that wasn't there. I became a specter in my own house." The gallery tumbled again, some gasping, others wiping away tears. The reporters wrote madly, feeling the sensational headline unfolding before their very eyes. The lawyer asked gently, "And why now? After all these years of silence, are you speaking?" Meri's eyes landed on Cody for the shortest moment. Her voice, though gentle, resonated with unshakable certainty. "Because for the first time, I see him being held accountable. And because our children deserve the truth. They deserve to know that we didn't fail them. He did." The silence that followed was stifling. Even the hum of cameras seemed to disappear. Meri had spoken her confession, not in anger, but in crushing candor. And in that candor, she had removed the last of Cody's defenses. Cody's attorney was white-faced, shuffling through his notes. No further questions. The judge nodded. "Mrs. Brown, you may step down." Meri stood up, her shoulders braced. She strode back to her seat, her footing firm, her expression set in unyielding resolve. Once again, she was not the forgotten wife. She was not the presence in the background. She was the one who had blown the courtroom wide open with honesty. Cody sat locked, his eyes fixed on the table, his kingdom of control eroding with every second. And as the judge adjourned the next recess, one question hung thick in the air. Meri Brown's silence had always shielded Cody, but her admission, raw, unflinching, undeniable, could be the firearm that finally killed him. The judge's gavel cracked sharply against the block, cutting through the tension like a blade. "We will now proceed with testimony from the children," she announced, her voice firm but carrying an unusual softness at the edges. "Due to the sensitivity of this matter, the gallery will remain silent. Any outburst will result in immediate removal." A silence dropped over the room. Reporters leaned in, pencils at the ready. Spectators breathed in. They all knew this was no longer about the wives, no longer about charges or cash. It was about the children and what they had in their hearts. The bailiff pushed open the side door, and in walked Isabel Brown. She stood tall now, self-possessed, but the flicker of vulnerability in her eyes gave away the burden of what she was undertaking. Each step closer to the witness stand was measured, careful, but her hands shook ever so slightly as she sat down. The bailiff administered the oath. Isabel's tone was soft but firm. "I do." Christine's lawyer came forward, her voice soft. "Isabel, can you describe for the court how you've gotten along with your father, Mr. Brown, over the past few years?" Isabel swallowed hard. Her gaze darted toward Cody for a moment, then back down to her hands. "It's been remote. He wasn't there for me when I needed him most." "Can you tell me what you mean by that?" the attorney asked gently. Tears swelled in her eyes, but she did not glance away. "When I had my scoliosis surgery, I invited him to come. I pleaded with him to come. I was terrified. I was in agony. And he said it was too hard for him, that he didn't want to drive. So my mom came with me. She sat with me the entire time, but he didn't. The courtroom came to a standstill. Even the scratching of the pens of reporters stopped. And how did that make you feel? Asked the attorney. Isabel's voice shook, like I didn't count. Like I wasn't worthy of him to come. I wept each night in that hospital bed, not because of the hurt, but because he was not there. The words cut across the room like a knife. Christine put her head down, silently weeping. Janelle squeezed her hand. Meri rubbed at her eyes. Cody's face contorted with pain. For the first time, he seemed less like a man who was in control and more like a man cornered by the reality of his own decisions. The lawyer took a pause before inquiring, "Do you still wish to have a relationship with your father?" Isabel replied softly, but her words rang in all ears. "I don't know anymore." The judge nodded gravely. "Thank you, Isabel. You may leave the stand." Isabel descended from the stand, her chin shaking yet her strides firm. She sat next to Christine, who promptly drew her into a protective hug. The bailiff called the next name, Garrison Brown. The young man walked into the courtroom with a soldier's stride, straight, firm, but his eyes turbulent. He raised his right hand, took the oath, and sat down heavily in the chair. The attorney inquired, "Garrison, can you tell me your present relationship with your father?" He hunched forward, voice deep and raspy. "There isn't one." He cut me off. "Why do you say that?" "Because I disagreed with him," Garrison spat. "Because I called him out for never being at home, for preferring one house to all the others. He told me if I didn't respect him, then I could stay out of his life. And he meant it. He never called again. Never called to check on me. I was his son one day, and a stranger the next." The gallery grew quiet, whispers rising like smoke. "And how did that make you feel?" Garrison's jaw tightened, fists curled on the table. "It snapped something inside me. I idolized him my entire life, even when he let us down. I kept waiting for him to arrive, for him to be the father we deserved. But instead, he just erased me, like I didn't exist. Like we didn't exist unless we were in Robin's house." His voice grew louder, shaking now with anger. "He left his own children, and I don't forgive him for that." The sentence lingered there like thunder. The judge rapped her gavel against the bench lightly to regain control, but her expression flashed a momentary sympathy. "Thank you, Garrison," the lawyer said gently. "No further questions?" Garrison stood tall, shoulders stiff, and left with the silent dignity of a man who had spoken his truth, pain though it may bring. Then came Aurora, another of Robin's daughters, called to testify for the defense. She took her seat, fidgeting, looking at her mother in the gallery. "Can you tell us about your relationship with your father?" Cody's attorney asked, voice politely encouraging. Aurora nodded hastily. "He's incredible. He's always been there for me and my brothers and sisters. He stands by us, loves us, spends time with us. And what do you think about the allegations of the other kids that he wasn't there?" Aurora hesitated. Her voice trembled. I don't know. I can only take responsibility for myself. He's been there for me, but I guess perhaps not for them." Cody shifted restlessly, his defense crumbling even in testimony intended to serve him. The coup de grace was delivered when the judge herself requested another testimony. Savannah, Janelle's daughter. Savannah moved slowly, seemingly hesitantly, her shoulder-length hair covering part of her face. She sat down, fingers together in a tight knot. The attorney moved carefully. "Savannah, can you explain to the court what your relationship with your father is?" Her voice was nearly too quiet to be heard. "There isn't one." "Why do you say that?" "Because he forgot about me," she whispered, shedding tears now. "Birthdays, school pictures, he just wasn't there. Sometimes he wouldn't even call. And I stopped waiting. I stopped hoping. Because it hurt too much. The room was completely still. No one shifted. No one breathed." Savannah's soft, cracked voice rang out louder than all the charges that had come before it. The lawyer paused, then said, "If you could tell your dad one thing right now, what would that be?" Savannah's eyes finally moved, locking with Kody's in the courtroom. "Why wasn't I enough?" Kody winced as though he'd been hit. His eyes welled with tears, his mouth opening as if to speak. Then the silence devoured him. The judge's gavel came down hard, shattering the magic. "That is sufficient. This court has heard the voices that it needed to hear." Savannah descended, weeping openly as Janelle hurried to envelop her in a hug. The gallery sat in stunned silence. Even the reporters were shaken, their pens moving more slowly, as if they struggled to convert the raw emotion into words on paper. Kody sat by himself, his face in his hands. The great patriarch, once inviolate, now stood exposed. Not as a ruler, but as a father who had been measured, weighed, and found wanting by the very offspring he professed to love. And the court understood. Their words had more power than any paper, any speech, any plea. They were the truth. The air in the courtroom was thick, near to being smothering, as the judge returned from a temporary recess. Her black robes streamed behind her like a shadow, her face impassive, chiseled from stone. They stood up. The bailiff's voice boomed, "All rise." When she was seated, the gavel came down once, crisp, authoritative. "Be seated." The screech of chairs on the floor sounded like a scream in the quiet that followed. All eyes were on her. All breaths were shallow. It was not just a finding regarding custody or visitation or money. It was a finding regarding truth, regarding accountability, regarding whether years of whispered suffering would ever be heard in the light of justice. Kody sat at the defense table with his hands so tight the knuckles turned white. Robin leaned forward, whispering quickly, but his eyes never left the judge. Hopeless, afraid. Over in the aisle, Christine sat with Isabel's hand clamped in hers, her jaw clenched. Janelle clutched Savannah close, and Meri sat silently, looking at the floor, her face impassive but her shoulders tense. The judge paused a long time, slowly thumbing through the fat pile of papers on her desk. She pushed up her glasses, cleared her throat. The silence grew. "This court has received extensive testimony throughout these proceedings," she started, her tone even, measured. "We have heard the spouses. We have reviewed financial records. And above all, we have heard the children's voices." At which, Kody moved uncomfortably, his head dipping slightly. "Is not in the heart of this matter," the judge went on, "marital breakdown, but responsibility, presence, and the duty a parent has to their children. This court does not adjudicate on love, but must adjudicate on care, on consistency, and on accountability." The words landed like hammer blows, harder with each passing one. Journalists scribbled away furiously, feeling the gravity of history in the process. The judge put down the papers and addressed Kody directly. Her eyes were steady, unflinching. "Mr. Brown, the depositions from your children were not statements alone, revelations of hurt. Hurt brought about by absence, abandonment, and decisions that always placed one home over the others." A murmur passed through the gallery. Kody's mouth opened, but no words were forthcoming. His lawyer put a cautioning hand on his arm, silently warning him to remain silent. The judge went on, "Your failure to attend Ms. Isabel Brown's surgery was particularly disturbing testimony. The court was impressed by her strength in voicing that truth. The words of Mr. Garrison Brown and Miss Savannah Brown further shed light upon a pattern of abandonment and alienation that cannot be dismissed." Christine shut her eyes, squeezing Isabel's hand harder. Garrison straightened his shoulders, his jaw clenched, his eyes fixed on Kody like a soldier waiting for justice. Savannah hid her face in her mother's shoulder, shaking. The judge's tone grew stern. "This court cannot force love, but it can, and it must, keep children safe from injury, including the injury of neglect." Kody's head fell lower, his face whiter. The judge paused with deliberation, then read the first decision. "Custody arrangements shall be attuned to the reality of life these children have reported. Effective today, Mr. Brown will have no primary custody of the minor children. Any visitation will be supervised and arranged at the discretion of the mothers, guided by the best interests of the children. Gasps rang out from the courtroom. Robin's hand shot up to her mouth. Christine sobbed hard against Isabel's head. Janelle let out a sharp exhalation, her face a mixture of relief and sadness. Kody sat stunned, mouth open, lips quivering. The gavel came down. Order in the court. But the judge wasn't done. In addition, the court determines that Mr. Brown has been derelict in his financial obligation to multiple of his children. An accounting in full shall be demanded, and child support shall be enforced both retroactively and prospectively. The reporters wrote furiously now, their pens scratching out the words like 1,000 murmurs. This was no longer a private family quarrel. It was a public accounting. The judge's tone became a shade softer as she spoke to the women. To Miss Christine Brown, Ms. Janelle Brown, and Ms. Meri Brown, this court recognizes the enormous burdens you have borne in bringing up your children in adversity and under uneven conditions. Though the law can't take that away, it sees that your position is as the stable base on which these children have come to depend. Christine cried freely now, her head moving back and forth through her tears. Janelle closed her eyes, her hand pressed to her heart. Meri finally looked up, her eyes dazed, but her face set. And to the children who testified before this court, the judge went on, her voice full of seriousness, your testimonies were heard. They counted. This decision is not simply a judicial ruling. It is an acknowledgement of your truth. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath again. Everyone leaned forward. Surely this was the end. Surely the hammer had fallen. But the judge wasn't done. She leaned forward, her voice now cutting like a blade. Mr. Brown, I have to speak to you directly. You appeared before this court claiming to be a patriarch, a leader, a father. But leadership is not domination, and fatherhood is not favoritism. A father does not abandon, does not withhold, does not forget. Kody winced, his shoulders now shaking. There was a threat of tears, but still he remained silent. This ruling can restrict your rights under law, but it is your actions, your decisions, that have already restricted your position in your children's lives. Whether or not you mend those bridges is beyond the power of this court. It is with you. The ensuing silence was stifling. The only audible sound was the slight scritching of pens and the muffled weeping of Christine's children in the gallery. The judge raised her gavel. This court is adjourned. The gavel broke like thunder, final and irrevocable. No one breathed for a moment. The gravity of the words hung in the air, compressing every chest. Then the room exploded, reporters spilling out through the doors, cameras lighting up, whispers growing into a storm. Christine stood, holding Isabel close, murmuring into her hair, "It's over. It's finally over." Janelle hugged Savannah close and kissed the crown of her head. Meri did not move, her face impassive, but her eyes sparkled with something akin to quiet vindication. Kody sat back, his head in his hands. Robin attempted to console him, but he brushed her away, shaking visibly. The rock-solid patriarch seemed smaller now, diminished, as if the reality had sucked all substance out of him. The children, though marked, left together with their mothers, heads held high, feet steady, their voices finally validated. And with the heavy courtroom doors closing behind them, one thing was certain. The verdict was not merely a legal decision, but the ultimate crack in the illusion of Cody Brown's infallible authority. For years, he had been the axis. Now, he was the shadow. And the world had seen him fall. The gavel comes down. Silence. And then anarchy. Reporters scrambling, cameras popping, murmurs swelling like thunder. Christine holds her daughter close, whispering through tears, "It's over. It's finally over." Janelle dabs at her eyes as Savannah hugs her waist. Meri drives ahead, her silence more deafening than words. Kody sits immobile, burying his face in his hands. Robin attempts to comfort him, but he shakes free, his body shaking. The once noble patriarch appears shattered, his crown of authority lost. On this day, the courtroom did not only hand down a verdict, it handed down the truth. The myth of togetherness collapsed. The voices of the children cut sharper than any celebrity. And the man, who previously had 4 wives, 16 kids, and the world's attention, left this courtroom by himself. The camera follows to the massive courtroom doors, closing heavily, ringing like the end of an era. This wasn't the end of Sister Wives. This was the end of Cody Brown's kingdom. Screen fades to black. Gavel sound echoes for one last time.